Well, ladies and gentlemen, late last night, our country took one more giant step towards becoming an all out judicial tyranny, and no, I'm not joking. So, folks, take a look at this, then we're going to have a lot to talk about. Let it play.
This has just come through in the last couple of minutes. A federal court in the United States has determined that President Donald Trump does not have the authority to impose these unilateral tariffs. So this is kind of a sweeping blow to the president's main weapon in this ongoing trade war. This is from a panel of judges on the US Court of International Trade. They essentially found these tariffs were unlawful and permanently vacated them. I don't know what true effect that has, but certainly the White House will be poring over this decision, and we should see some kind of response or reaction from them. That big breaking news out of the United States.
So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Late last night, the U.S. Court of International Trade pushed through a ruling saying that President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs are unconstitutional and that now they're completely null and void. Now, as a little bit of a background, much like the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Court of International Trade is composed of 9 unelected federal judges that are appointed to lifelong judicial terms. And so it was this body of judges that decided to undermine President Trump's executive authority and to effectively spit on the overwhelming democratic will of the American people. Very clearly, this ruling from the Court of International Trade against President Trump's tariffs is just yet another act of judicial overreach, doing nothing other than undermining President Trump's constitutional authority. And so, folks, trust me, we have a lot to talk about today, but before we do, I want to say real quick that if you guys enjoy the daily news updates, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. But okay, check this out. In 1962, a piece of legislation was passed called the Trade Expansion Act, which gave the president the unilateral authority to impose and modify trade tariffs that he determined to be crucial for the well-being of the country and for maintaining national security. You see, while the U.S. Constitution does grant Congress the power to impose trade tariffs, by passing this 1962 Trade Expansion Act, Congress delegated almost all of that power to the executive branch, i.e., the president. And so what this did was allow the president to adjust tariff rates as well as impose brand new tariffs altogether without needing congressional approval. But now, check this out. Since the passing of that act in 1962, every single U.S. president has imposed trade tariffs, the only exceptions being Gerald Ford, who took over for a couple of years after Nixon resigned, and Joe Biden, who took a 4-year-long nap in the Oval Office. President Nixon imposed a flat 10% tariff on every foreign product entering the country. Carter imposed a tariff on foreign-made color television sets. Reagan imposed tariffs on foreign motorcycles and Japanese electronics. Bush Sr. imposed a massive tariff on Canadian lumber. Clinton imposed a tariff on foreign luxury cars. Bush Jr. imposed a tariff on foreign steel. And Barack Obama imposed all kinds of tariffs on Chinese products. So after 60 years of U.S. presidents imposing trade tariffs on foreign nations without any issue whatsoever, only now that President Trump is in office is there a constitutional crisis. Only now that President Trump is actually trying to put America first does the Court of International Trade step in and say that presidential tariffs are actually unconstitutional. Ladies and gentlemen, there's really no other way to put this, but what we are witnessing is judicial tyranny unfold every single day in front of our very eyes. Once again, we have a bunch of unelected federal judges that are stripping the democratically elected president of the United States, President Trump, of his rightful power to protect the American economy. The reality is, as we talked about just a moment ago, President Trump's tariffs are a continuation of a long-standing presidential tradition of using executive authority to protect American national economic interests. And as we've all seen, President Trump's tariffs are actually working literally right at this very moment. President Trump's tariffs have brought millions of manufacturing jobs back to America. They're generating hundreds of millions of dollars every single day, and they're helping President Trump rebuild the global economy in the image of America first. We've also seen that, in response to President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, country after country around the globe have dropped their own predatory trade tariffs on American products in an effort to work out a new, mutually beneficial deal with President Trump. So, folks, undeniably, President Trump's tariffs are working. As you all know, President Trump's trade policies actually prioritize American sovereignty, ensuring that the country isn't exploited by foreign nations in the global market, which is exactly what's been happening for decades now. So the reality is, the Court of International Trade's decision to shut down President Trump's tariffs just gives foreign nations like China undue leverage in the ongoing trade negotiations, ultimately weakening America's bargaining power. In truth, this ruling is an absolute victory for all of the anti-American globalists who are hell-bent on picking this nation apart, prioritizing foreign interests over the livelihoods of American workers and American businesses. President Trump's tariffs are strategically designed to rebuild domestic U.S. manufacturing, to equalize all of these egregiously lopsided and insanely predatory trade deals that we've found ourselves in, and to restore American economic dominance. In fact, take a look at what the CEO of NVIDIA, one of the biggest tech companies in the entire world, had to say about all of this just yesterday afternoon. Let it play.
The most important thing is this, Jim. Our president wants America to win. The president laid out a bold vision for United States, for America to reindustrialize the onshore manufacturing so that we can have a more resilient supply chain, so that we can create jobs locally, very importantly, so that we become great at manufacturing again. At a time when manufacturing isn't about labor, but it's about labor only, but it's about technology. And so that vision is incredible. This initiative by the president is likely going to set the United States up for a century, for this century to come. This is going to be a very big deal.
And so, folks, once again, this is what President Trump's economic policy is all about. The reality is, President Trump's economic policies are actually working, and quite literally every single economic metric proves it. But the unfortunate truth is that the radical progressive federal judiciary's interference totally impedes President Trump's ability to negotiate deals that actually put America first. In fact, let's do a little bit of a recap here. Take a look at this. According to the radically progressive federal judiciary, President Trump isn't allowed to deport violent illegal aliens. He's not allowed to prohibit men from competing in women's sports. He can't revoke the visas of anti-American immigrants. He can't freeze the funding for foreign aid. And now, he can't even impose trade tariffs. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very clear what the radical progressives are trying to do. They are actively, in front of our very eyes, weaponing the federal judiciary in order to completely subvert the democratic will of the American people, bringing our democratic republic down to its knees. And I'll tell you what, if the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't intervene in all of this judicial overreach, we might as well not even have presidential elections anymore. If a bunch of unelected federal judges can issue nationally sweeping universal injunctions and usurp the president's constitutionally granted executive authority, then we don't have a democratic republic. No, we have a judicial tyranny. So, of course, the Trump administration is going to contest this ruling, and this entire situation is going to end up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. But until then, President Trump can't even perform one of the primary, most fundamental components of the job that we all elected him to do. You know, really, this is all very ironic. The Democrats absolutely love to talk about how we have a constitutional crisis, but what they don't ever mention is that they are the ones causing it. And so, folks, I wish I had a positive note to end the video on here, but the reality is, if the Supreme Court doesn't get involved and actually stand up for the integrity of our democratic republic, we're not going to have one for very much longer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap up, I do want to say real quick that we officially have a Morse News Twitter page as well as a Morse News Facebook page. So if you use either of those platforms, please go down below and drop a follow in order to get breaking news updates that relate to everything we talk about here in the YouTube videos. But everyone, that is going to be a wrap for today's video, so please go down below and drop a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this. Please like the video while you're down there, and like I said earlier, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. Thank you all very much for tuning in today, and of course, as always, stay safe.